Many trilogies in media history are regarded as masterpieces. BioShock, Resident Evil, and Uncharted are all games that I perceive as peak gaming for their times, and the Crash Bandicoot trilogy belongs in that fabled Hall of Fame. While they have some issues, and are kind of hard to capture on modern hardware, there aren't many things that can truly hold a candle to the effects that this series would cause to ripple on the future of the gaming industry. Just like Crash Bandicoot 2, Crash Bandicoot Warp's development started almost as soon as the release of its previous entry, with Crash 3 starting development in January of 1998, while Crash 2 was released in October 1997. Since Naughty Dog had been aiming for a yearly release slot, this meant that they only had 10 months to develop a final polished product, and they certainly delivered. But Crash Warped isn't an entry that's without its flaws, and despite being the highest rated game in the entire series, it does have its fair share of problems that indicate that it is indeed a product of its time. So what did Crash Warped do wrong or right that sets it apart from its previous entries? Was it the absolute slog of vehicles they threw at us? Or was it the introduction of power-ups into the series that made it shine brighter than my future? Follow along as we cover it all in a brief retrospective of Crash Bandicoot Warped. I just want to point out before we begin that this game is in fact my favourite game in the entire series. It was actually the first Crash game I played as a kid, and just like my grades, as I grew older, I went backwards and revisited the previous entries. It's incredibly hard for me to be critical of this series as a whole, but I don't want to deliver something biased, so I'm going to try my best to look at it from a neutral perspective. Just like Crash 2, Crash Warped opens up with something falling from the sky to set the story into motion. The Cortex Vortex from the previous games lands in a temple located somewhere on the Wumpa Islands, promptly freeing Aku Aku's evil twin, Uka Uka. Aku Aku hears Uka Uka's laugh in the distance and immediately knows that something bad is going to happen. It's also in this entry that they gave Aku Aku an actual speaking role outside of his usual Ooga Booga sound he made in previous games.
Uka Uka is free. No, it cannot be. Evil, great evil has come.
His voice actor from here all the way up to Crash Twinsanity is Mel Winkler, who also appears in cartoons such as Batman and Superman the Animated Series. Bringing a minor character into the limelight is something done well, especially to flesh out the lore of the series. Naughty Dog does a great job of taking what is realistically just a mechanic delivered by an item and turning it into a character to use as a driving story element. This is not something that is done much these days, and I wish it was used more in modern gaming outside of the typical Deus Ex Machina or red herring tropes. In the next scene, we're introduced to Uka Uka for the first time, who's having a great time berating Cortex for his past failures. Clancy Brown, who also voices Cortex, voices Uka Uka.
None have dared to fail to break Uka Uka even once. But you, Cortex, you have failed me twice. Great Uka Uka, it was that infernal Bandicoot.
I know it's not inherently game related, but I can appreciate and acknowledge the range of Clancy, especially in this series. I couldn't even tell that Uka Uka and Cortex were the same actors, which shows that he puts love into the characters he portrays and doesn't just speak in his normal voice, unlike some other actors. Uka Uka is angry at Cortex for losing the power crystals collected in the last game, but has a backup plan which entails travelling through time and collecting them from their original places. Basically, Crash Bandicoot pulled an Avengers Endgame before Endgame was cool. Closing out the scene, we're briefly shown Entropy, whose name is a play on the word entropy. This apparently has something to do with thermodynamics and how we perceive time, but I failed my physics class in high school. Just know that his name makes sense, and we'll leave it at that. The scene fades to black, and we cut back to Aku Aku giving Crash and Coco a quick rundown of his history with Uka Uka, and they make their way over to the Time Twister to prevent Cortex from getting his hands on the power crystals. It's here we're given control of Crash, and shown the hub that will be called home for the run of the game. The story system from Crash 2 has completely been replaced, opting to give us one large room with 5 cut-off sections that unlock after beating the boss of the previous section. Personally, I enjoyed the travelling system for Crash 2 more than what Crash Warped offers. It added a further feel of progression to the game by making us ride an elevator up or down to a section we needed to revisit, with the environment changing to correlate what batch of levels we wanted to enter. While Crash Warped does keep the theme intact, I feel it would have been better done if the system from Crash 2 returned, giving us entire rooms that were medieval or Arabian in their aesthetics on the respective hubs. The entrances to levels have also been replaced by buttons. Instead of simply walking into the respective numbered level, we must now activate the level with the buttons and jump straight into the time twister. I quite like this aspect to a certain extent. It gives the aura of us being a giant machine that needs to have its own controls. The first level we enter is Toad Village, and during our time travel shenanigans, we're intercepted by Cortex. He flexes on us that he has a mask helping him now too, and disappears as quickly as he appears to begin with. These little monologue sections happen a lot in this game. In fact, I'd say they happen too much compared to Crash 2. In Crash 2, Cortex and Coco only appeared when they held a purpose of progressing the story, whereas in Crash Warped it seems like every 4 levels there's a small cutscene with a boss appearing to simply speak for the sake of it. Entering the level, Crash jumps out of the portal we entered, and upon exiting, it shows the Time Twister room, which I think is a cool addition to the game. It's a subtle way of showing some progression and the time traveling aspect of the game's core. The first thing we notice in the level is the clear changes from the previous games in terms of their design. Gone are the claustrophobic paths of the jungles and ice caps, replacing the worlds with wide open roads that have some absolutely amazing backdrops. Naughty Dog's ability to take hardware limitations as a guideline instead of a strict rule is not unheard of, especially in the early days of Crash, and Warped really does show it. This is even more apparent when in this level, you can see the end of the stage straight from the very beginning, with the massive castle in the background serving as the exit of the stage. We're also introduced to new enemy types in this stage, such as Cortex's goats, hopping frogs, and Cortex knights that will swing and attack at a moment's notice. Just like Crash 2, the bonus levels come back in this game, which would be a crime if they didn't, considering they're a staple of the Crash series. One thing that Warped does a little better than Crash 2 is theming the bonus levels correctly, at least from my perspective. The bonus stages in Crash 2 felt more like off the beaten path sections, whereas in Crash Warped, they feel like actual extensions of the world they're a part of. Grabbing our first power crystal, we exit the level and enter the next one, Under Pressure. While I've had heavy disdain for water levels in the past, the water levels in Warped are very well done. This is the first time in the series that we can actively control Crash in an underwater environment, and even though water levels are supposed to be annoyingly difficult, there's no instance in these stages where I felt like a death was unfair. The enemy placement and obstacles are all done in a way that gives us time to think about our next step, and with the controls in these stages being extremely responsive, it gives us time to react accordingly if we make a mistake. By spreading various enemies throughout the level designers created a great aquatic-based stage. We're also given control of a vehicle in this stage, the Submergible. When I was a kid, I thought these were living, breathing cyborg fish, but as it turns out, they're just all machine, which now just highlights the fact that I was a stupid kid. The submergibles are there as a way to make our way through the stage a little faster, and also destroy some of the environment that hides crates that are otherwise inaccessible. They also serve as an extra piece of damage, being destroyed when attacked instead of taking Crash along with it. My only problem with these types of levels is the lack of clarity of where it sits in the timeline. Every stage has a clear era they sit in, whereas the underwater stages seem to be very vague about their theme. There are plenty of theories on the internet, such as the time placement being in the Atlantis era, but if I need to go out of my way to accept a theory as a story placement, it's just shitty writing. Closing out Under Pressure takes us to the next level, Orient Express. Attempting to jump into the warp portal causes Crash to fall straight through, and Coco takes his place in this stage. I do like the idea of fooling the player into thinking that only Crash will be playable in this game, only for it to throw a complete curveball and have us take control of Coco. This stage is a recreation of levels such as Hog Wild from Crash 1 and Barrett from Crash 2. Similarly to those levels, this stage works on a linear straight path with a bunch of obstacles put in our way while we dash our way through to the end of the level, and I'm probably putting it lightly when I say bunch of obstacles. The level design is fantastic, fast and colourful, but things that are put in our way in this stage are way too much. In this entire level, there's barely any time for us to catch our breath, with almost every section having dragons, bottomless pits, and various lab-assisted renditions standing in our way. I understand that at this point in the series, this level type has appeared in every game so far, and players are familiar with these stages, but I think what misses the mark here is that more does not equal better. More obstacles and enemy placements do not make for a smoother gameplay loop. It just serves to be more infuriating because you missed a jump that you would have made if there weren't 2 dragons and 3 lab assistants you needed to dodge at the last possible second. It may just be me being jaded, but upon revisiting this game, it feels like Crash 2 did these level themes much better than Crash Warped. Heading into the next level, we're interrupted by Tiny Tiger, who is the boss of the medieval themed section. He asks us to bring the power crystals to ancient Rome, or risk being crushed, and considering how our last fight went, we'll take our chances. Boneyard is a level in the same vein as Unbearable from Crash 2 and Boulders from Crash 1. The difference here is, instead of a boulder or a polar bear chasing you, it's a gigantic triceratops to match the obvious time period it's set in. This stage's design is fantastic. The ambience and atmosphere of running from your life from a giant dinosaur while dodging over fiery pits and spinning through tall grass is extremely fun and true to the time travel nature of the game. Before anyone points out my hypocrisy of praising this stage but bashing Orient Express, when this stage is just a rendition of previous entries, I want to point out that what this stage does differently is the addition of level transitioning. While stages like Unbearable had a single path that was simply running from whatever obstacle was chasing you, Boneyard merges 2 level styles into one in between sections, allowing us to have your normal platforming in a chase level. The end of the level brings us to our next, which is Making Waves. Just like Orient Express, we take control of Coco in this section of the game, which makes me wonder whether Naughty Dog did this intentionally, because it seems like every stage you take control of Coco is just horrible. The art style of the level is fantastic, because who doesn't love pirates? But outside of that, the art style is the only thing that these levels have going for them. In this stage, Coco rides a jet ski across the ocean bombarded by obstacles such as pirate lab assistants and pirate ships that shoot bombs at her, making us ride around to dodge and weave the horribly placed enemies. The dead zone for this level also feels extremely off, since the handling for the jet ski is extremely loose, which can cause us to lose control in a single moment. The level itself is also designed horribly, only giving us an arrow at the top of our screen that simply points in the direction that we need to go. I don't know if this needs to be said, but if your playtesters got so confused about where they needed to go that you thought the way to fix this was just putting an arrow that points to the exit of the level, then you should have completely scrapped this level design or rebuilt it to match the original vision you were going with. Playing as Coco and taking control of a different character is enjoyable, but if you reserve that character for your poorly designed levels, it will only lead players to subconsciously associate that character with a negative experience. Just like Pack Attack from Crash 2, the jet ski levels seem to only be there because they can be, and are simply unenjoyable and lackluster at best. I'd even go as far as saying that these levels are even worse than the Insane trilogy, but we'll save that for a future video. Grabbing our 5th crystal marks the end of the medieval theme, and we're able to take on our first boss of the game. Tiny Tiger returns in Crash Warped with a grand entrance, and the game greatly improves his fight compared to the previous entry. Instead of ripping off Ripperoo, he's actually given a unique moveset and gimmick that sets him apart from the rest of the bosses in the series. The first thing is the environment that we're put in, which is a gladiator arena set in the ancient Rome time period. Naughty Dog choosing this setting was a smart one, when you consider that in ancient Rome, gladiators were typically pitted against not only each other, but elephants, crocodiles, snakes, and you guessed it, tigers. The little addition of the stage fading in, with Cortex sitting on his throne, is also amazing, since it adds some nice depth to Cortex using the time twister for his own agenda and leaving his mark on history. The first phase is about as you'd expect, dodging Tiny's attacks with his trident, which causes him to get stuck and allows us to damage him. Knocking him out takes us to the gimmick phase, which, keeping true to its theme, throws an absolute onslaught of lions out of their cages for us to dodge and weave in between. Surviving this drags Tiny back into the fray, and it rinses and repeats 2 more times, with each gimmick phase getting faster and more aggressive. My only issue with this fight is how short it is. Giving Tiny 3 phases of health in such a fun battle seems like a bit of a letdown when giving 1 or 2 more additional phases would have added a bit more longevity to the fight, leaving players with more of an impression. However, since it is the first boss fight in the game, I can understand Naughty Dog not wanting to make it too difficult for players. Beating Tiny Tiger gives us this game's gimmick, power-ups. Unlike its predecessors, Crash Warp provides players with a physical reward in the form of power-ups that enhance and expand Crash's moveset when bosses are defeated. The first power-up we get is the Supercharged Body Slam, which is not that great. I have a lot of problems with the power-ups in this game, but that's something we'll cover shortly. Moving on to the second section of the game, we leave the medieval theme behind and are met with the next. For some reason on the official Crash Bandicoot wiki, this theme is labelled as Egyptian, which doesn't make much sense at all considering that the fourth section is much more Egyptian in design, but instead called Pyramid. I'm unsure if these themes were ever labelled officially, or more of a community thing where people just unanimously agreed on a name and stuck with it. The first stage of this theme is G-Wiz, which is a recycled version of Toad Village. As with previous videos, we'll only be talking about levels that are original in theme, which Crash Warped unfortunately does not have a lot of. The reason G-Wiz is mentioned is due to its subtle change in environment and the addition of a new enemy type. The daylight of Toad Village is replaced by a sunset, giving a fresh change to the atmosphere of the level. In this stage, we're also given the opportunity to test out the new ability that we got from Tiny. The Supercharged Body Slam allows us to slam into reinforced crates and break them, something Crash normally couldn't do previously, except he could. In Crash 2, there were reinforced crates that Crash had no problems with breaking, yet in this game, there needed to be an entire ability introduced in order to break them open. This is where my problem with the abilities in this game comes in. You can beat every boss in the game, gain a new ability from each, and still play the game completely normally without using a single ability you've earned. There is zero incentive to use the newly gained powers at any point in the story, which takes away from the flair of them overall. I personally feel that if you're given an opportunity to expand the player's moveset and powers, there should be obstacles in the way of the player that forces us to use those powers. Yes, I understand that they are there to help with 100% completion of the game, since it does require you to get every crystal, gem and relic. But to me, it does not incentivize me enough to go back and replay those levels in a faster fashion with a more rounded moveset. It just makes it more tedious to get 100% completion, especially when a good chunk of the stages don't actively allow us to use the powers such as Orient Express, Under Pressure, and Making Waves. The new enemy type introduced in this level is the Lab Assistant Wizard, which will throw a magic orbit Crash that will turn him into a frog if he's hit. Outside of that, there are no massive fundamental changes to these types of levels. Stage 7 is called Hang 'em High, and is a breathtaking entrance into the series. This stage's theme is Arabian inspired, which both makes sense and doesn't make sense because once again, for some damn reason, the time era is named Egyptian. Hang 'em High immediately opens up with a wall in front of us, and brings back a small portion of the vertical traversal that hasn't been seen since Crash 1, making us bounce on not only crates but carpets as well. Reaching the top of the stage shows us a new enemy, which is the Scimitar Lab Assistant, who, true to their name, attempts to attack us with their scimitars wildly. Spinning him away takes us across a few bouncy carpets, and we're introduced to another new Lab Assistant, which is the Genie. This enemy's design is interesting, since they can float around and block Crash from progressing, but have no defense at all, which makes them pretty easy to deal with. This stage also brings back the same traversal concept from the level Sewer or Later in Crash 2, which is the Grates. Jumping onto them allows us to hold on for dear life as we climb our way across to avoid imminent death, plagued by scorpions that block our way forward. Unlike Crash 2, we can actually attack on the Grates this time, giving us a way to break the crates that are in front of us. The last enemy in this stage is the pot-carrying monkey, which requires 2 attacks to get rid of. Jumping over them isn't an option, so we must instead attack them once to have a pot fall into their head, which then allows us to spin them away for good. This level really ties everything together nicely. The enemies are thematically well placed, and the amount of options it gives the player to make their way through the stage are indicators that Naughty Dog truly are amazing at their craft when levels aren't being recycled or rebranded like Crash 2's were. As a final note, the soundtrack is absolutely amazing to boot, and suits the time period very well. Grabbing our power crystal marks the end of the stage, and moves us to the level Hog Ride. I have a lot of things to say about Hog Ride, and most of them are not good. Unlike Coco's jet ski levels where the controls are too loose, Hog Ride takes those controls and makes them way too tight. Taking corners causes Crash to lean down, which is meant to add to the physics of the game, but the moment Crash leans too far, the controls immediately become too loose and just cause us to spin out. Littered throughout the stage are various boost pads that are intended to help Crash overtake opponents, except when you do hit one of them, it transitions us into a mono, which tightens the controls even more and makes it impossibly difficult to steer. The obstacles themselves are well placed and easy to circumvent, but when you combine them with other racers who have absolutely zero respect for road laws that will smash into Crash, it makes for a horrible experience that is not enjoyable whatsoever. The theme of the level is the only thing that sticks out to me, which is placed in the 1950s US greaser era, but outside of that, these levels are bottom barrel leftovers at best. Attempting to enter the next stage, we're interrupted by this section's boss, which is Dingodile. Faithful to his name, Dingodile is a mutated hybrid of a dingo and a crocodile respectively. Usually in other forms of media, overplayed Australian accents are easy to pick out, but William Hootkin's portrayal here is done scarily well.
Good day, mates. Dingodile's the name, and Uka Uka and Cortex gave me orders to bring the crystals to them during the Ice Ages. So give me the goods and shove off, or I'll roast yous.
Ignoring Dingodile's empty threats, we enter level 9, Tomb Time. This stage drops us straight into the entrance of a tomb guarded by a new enemy, which is a rattlesnake, and easy enough to get past. Putting the player outside of the level to begin with is amazing, because it adds to the feeling of us about to explore a giant ancient part of history. The head on the tomb's entrance is also Cortex's, which goes back to what I said about earlier about Cortex leaving his mark throughout history, so much so that he's revered as both an emperor and a pharaoh. Heading inside, the player is met with your typical pitfall, only for the next one to have an alligator jumping out of it, which I think is a subtle nod to the way the orcas would jump out of the pits in Crash 2 during the polar levels. There are also a lot more environmental obstacles in this stage. Similar to the ice paths in Crash 2, the oil spills serve as a way to speed us up as we run through the level, which can have some very bad consequences if we aren't paying attention to what's in front of us. Another returning concept is the switch-activated doors, which haven't been seen since the labs in Crash 1. Further ahead, we're also faced with another enemy variation, which is the Jar Monkey. These monkeys possess otherworldly abilities to teleport between different jars, throwing rocks at the player and hiding again right away, turning it into a glorified game of whack-a-mole. When I was a kid, these levels were my favourite to play through, but revisiting them as an adult, nothing particularly shines brightly about them as I thought so many years ago. Truth be told, even as I was writing this script, I was excited to speak about these levels, but sitting there and processing my feelings about them really has come up with nothing. A good portion of the tomb stages seem to be rehashed mechanics from previous games, just in a much larger and fleshed out environment. Going back to what I said about Orient Express, more does not actually mean better if the mechanics used are just ones we have really seen before, whether in this game or the entries before it. A later level by the name of Tomb Waiter has a much better premise than this one, but we'll cross that watery bridge when we come to it. The final level of this section is Midnight Run, which is the Orient Express, but instead of it being during the day, it's instead at night, because nothing really screams good level design like taking a previous stage, changing some obstacles, taking away the sun, and calling it a day. Grabbing the 10th crystal leads us to the second boss, Dingodile. When asked about my favourite Crash Bandicoot bosses, Dingodile is definitely in my top 3, and given how I feel, is often tied with Nitrous Brio's fight from Crash 1. The boss's environment may be extremely lacking, but it makes up for it in its execution of the fight. Dingodile shoots the ceiling of the stage, causing an ice barrier to fall down and rotate around him that acts as protection. While he's protected, his first phase entails him shooting out of his flamethrower into the sky, which then comes hurling back down in the form of fireballs and forces us to run and dodge if we don't want to be roasted. After we're done running around, he'll get frustrated and shoot at us, which will cause the barrier that protects him to be destroyed, and allow us to attack him provided he doesn't reduce us to ash. Each passing phase is the same concept, except each time when he shoots into the sky, an extra fireball will fall back down, leaving less of a gap for us to take safety, which really requires us to think fast. I think the thing that really brings the boss fight together for me is the method of attack. In other games, when you deal damage, the boss is quickly knocked down or shrugs it off and moves to the next phase. But in this fight, Dingodile stays knocked down for quite a while, and his flamethrower has a timer that explodes to cause damage. It was a neat concept I found very fascinating when I was younger, since it implies that Crash isn't really strong enough to take down Dingodile, and it's instead his own confidence in thinking his weapons are perfect that's his downfall. Beating Dingodile unlocks our second ability in the game, the double jump. Since we all know how I feel about abilities in this game, and the name within itself is pretty self-explanatory, I'll spare the rant because you already know how often I'll actually use this ability. Moving on to the third theme section is the China section, but due to what I assume is a 10-month time crunch, pretty much every stage here is a rendition of a previous one. Instead of creating at least one unique stage, Naughty Dog has instead taken previous levels and simply changed the time of day and added one or two new enemy types. The first level is Dynamite, which is a copy of the level Boneyard with a few new enemies sprinkled in. In this level, we're introduced to the Pterodactyls, the Wavelab Assistant, and my personal favourite, the Crash Fish. The Crash Fish resembles and acts the same way Crash would, such as spinning to knock us back and moving in our way to block our path. This design is something I really liked. Showing a mutated version of a would-be Crash as another species was really weird and fascinating. The level within itself is definitely an improvement to Boneyard, but not that great either, since we've already seen what these stages have to offer. Leaving Dynamite takes us to the second Arabian themed stage in the game, High Time. Just like Midnight Run, the only difference in its predecessor is the fact that it's set at night instead of the day. The only unique thing about this stage is its addition of one new enemy type, which is accurately named the Arsonist. These enemies throw bombs out of their apartment windows that light the path in front of us on fire, forcing us to time our jumps to make sure we're not burned. We also get a second variation of the Scimitar Lab Assistant, who instead of lunging at us with his sword, decides to throw them at us instead. Just like Dynamite, it really does improve on its previous stage by adding new obstacles and ways for us to think. But personally, I believe that to make a level stand out, it needs much more than just a shade change and new enemies to fight. The third and final level in this section to discuss is Doubleheader. The only thing in Doubleheader that sets it apart is a new enemy variation. Although it is a variation, its design as a giant two-headed creature that serves as a unique obstacle in our way sets it apart from the rest. It's at this point that the double jump actually becomes useful, requiring us to jump on top of the enemy to take it out, which can only be done with the double jump. The stage also has a rainy backdrop, which is a nice addition to the stage when it's the first time we've seen some form of weather added into the game when you consider it was everywhere in Crash 2. Unfortunately, with the other two stages having absolutely zero uniqueness, we breeze through them and enter the third boss fight, Nefarious Tropy. This battle is extremely fun to play. The environment really screams futuristic, and Tropy's design complements that even further. Tropy sits on the other side of the map, throwing orbs in our direction that obviously have aimbot installed because they seek the player like single MILFs in the area. Dodging them all brings phase 2, which entails him shooting lasers towards us that we need to dodge and jump over. Just like the enemies in Doubleheader, the double jump is very useful here, and one of the few rare instances that a power-up is used frequently. Avoiding all the lasers will cause Tropy to slam his weapon down and initiate a recharge phase, allowing us to jump across the platforms to deal damage, which will then teleport to the other side of the map. This process repeats 3 times, as usual getting higher in difficulty the lower his health bar becomes. Another thing I noticed is that in between phases, when Tropy changes his position, the environment also changes, cycling through the various themes we'll visit throughout the game. Finally, the soundtrack very much ties the level all together, giving a very twisted and out-of-tune track that matches the aspect of time travel perfectly. Beating Tropy grants us the ability Death Tornado Spin, which allows Crash to have a longer spin that can also help us glide when we're in the air. Moving through to the 4th section, the Egyptian theme offers a few unique stages that are great additions to the game. The first stage is Sphinxinator. Even though it is a rehash of Tomb Time, The level does offer some new enemy variations and obstacles that warrant enough of a discussion. The first enemy we see is the mummy bouncing towards us. The design is whimsical and fun, which really captures the essence of Crash. Attacking them breaks open the sarcophagus to reveal an actual mummy inside. The next enemy is another lab assistant variant, who sports a flamethrower to take us out. The concept of a pharaoh having a flamethrower is weird, but I'm willing to accept that Cortex airdropped them with some modern tech to take care of Crash. Beating this takes us to the level Bye Bye Blimps, which I very much enjoy. During my research for this video, I discovered that the general community opinion is that these kinds of stages are universally disliked, which I don't really understand. This is the first stage in the game where a level we play as Coco is actually fun, giving us the ability to take control of a biplane with mounted machine guns, which is freaking awesome. Although simple in its premise and design, we go high above the clouds with our objective to destroy 7 Cortex blimps spread across the area. The enemies in this stage are also slightly overpowered, but not enough to warrant any broken controllers, as the level offers floating balloons that can hold crates that recharge our health. Unlike the other stages where we take control of vehicles, the plane in this one is very easy and smooth to control, which makes me wonder where Naughty Dog went wrong in stages such as Orient Express and Hog Ride. Overall, I don't understand why this stage is hated, considering that the levels I just mentioned are praised much more than this one, but are lower in quality and design. The next stage is Tell No Tales, another level in which we take control of Coco on the jet ski. This level plays just like the first with no extra additions, and the only reason I even bring up this stage is that there is something unique about it which, funnily enough, has nothing to do with this game. Tell No Tales was used by Insomniac as a secret Easter egg in their game Spyro the Dragon. Inputting the buttons triangle and L1 on the title screen of the game would actually allow the player to access this stage as a demo, with a few minor changes from the full release, such as the crystal having a different placement and a slightly different soundtrack. Level 19 is Future Frenzy, and the first time we're given a future level theme if you don't count Tropy's boss fight. Entering this stage prompts this theme's boss to speak to us, which is Dr. N. Gin. In this game, N. Gin seems to have a slight update to his appearance, while still maintaining the same look, such as more shadows under his eyes, which makes sense considering I'd be depressed if I worked for a sentient mask and insane scientist as well. Future Frenzy is one of those stages that really wraps everything up in a nice little package. Unlike the previous Cortex levels in Crash 2 where they were hard for the sake of being hard, these levels maintain their difficulty but are a lot less claustrophobic in their design, actually giving us time to breathe. The level design is wide open and littered with obstacles that give us time to assess what to do next, which gives the impression that these levels were designed with the idea of our platforming expertise, culminating in giving a giant obstacle course and testing our knowledge. The stage also brings back a concept from Crash 1's Temple Ruins, giving us a platform to jump on that will traverse us to the next portion of the stage. Unlike Temple Ruins where the backdrop was dark due to hardware limitations, Naughty Dog being able to do this in a game released just 2 years later on the same hardware truly is a testament to how much love they put into their games once upon a time, before they realized that turning The Last of Us into Skyrim was all they needed to make money. The design of the stage is also breathtaking, moving us through mirrored portions that show Crash's reflection, which really is just a flex for Naughty Dog when you consider that the only way to actually do this back then was to make a copy of the entire stage and then move it into the background. Grabbing the 19th crystal gives us the end of the stage, and takes us to the next, Tomb Waiter. As I mentioned before, when I discussed how Tomb Time doesn't offer anything revolutionary, Tomb Waiter reverses the theme on its head and offers a fun and unique way to play through the stage. The main way for us to make our way through this level is to spin cogs that can drain the water from the flooded temple, requiring us to move fast and avoid all the enemies in our way before the water fills up the room again. It's also in this level that, for the first time, using abilities we've gained so far in conjunction with each other actually offers some sort of advantage, allowing us to double jump and death spin over large gaps in flooded halls. The enemies that are in our path are mostly unique as well, such as the spiked coffin mummy, shield carriers, and scarabs. Just like Future Frenzy, Tomb Waiter offers such an amazing change of pace, making us feel like everything we've learned in not only this game but the previous ones are coming together, which makes us feel so much more experienced. With our 20th crystal gained, we also gain entrance to the 4th boss. N. Gin's fight takes everything from Crash 2's battle and just ramps it up to the extreme. The design of the fight is top tier, the mechanics are perfectly executed, and the length is just perfect. We take control of Coco in this stage, with our vehicle this time being a small spaceship which is tiny in comparison to the mech. And we need much more than a few Wumpa Fruit to disassemble N. Gin's new and improved ship. The opening scene takes place on the moon, which is a significant improvement in contrast to Crash 2's, which took place inside of Cortex's space station, giving a true feel to the scale of the battle. N. Gin goes through multiple phases, shooting at us with his ship-mounted miniguns as we dodge around and fire back, dealing all the damage we can while trying to survive. Not only that, but the rockets from Crash 2 also return, honing in on the player as they rotate around the bullets hailed towards them. Defeating each piece of the mech doesn't mean that N. Gin is beaten. Instead, it leads us straight into a second phase with 8 bars of health, which officially makes this the largest boss fight in terms of health in the original trilogy. The second phase is much more difficult than the first, showing that N. Gin wasn't bluffing when he told us he made some modifications. The great thing about the fight is that it's not overly difficult and rage-inducing, giving us the chance to destroy the missiles and mines shot at us if we're unable to dodge at the last second. This battle is everything that Cortex's fight in Crash 2 should have led into and more, and I can't praise it enough. Finishing off the space mech gives us the 4th ability, which is the Fruit Bazooka. The 5th theme is simply named Futuristic, and unfortunately, Naughty Dog, well, pulled a Naughty Dog here, and have only given us one original level to speak about, with the other 4 being redesigns. Bug Light, within itself, is also a redesign of Lights Out and Night Fight from Crash 1 and 2, but at least it's only reused once in this game. Bug Light takes us back to the Egyptian tombs of Tomb Raider and Tomb Time, but instead throws us into the Jaws of Darkness, bringing back the light system of the previous entries in the form of the Firefly from Crash 2. This level is huge, taking place both inside and outside, with snakes, crocodiles, pits, and mummies being thrown at us. The start of the stage has no need for the fireflies. By entering the tomb is pitch black, which then gives us a way to light up the path ahead of us. Having dangerous pits appear within 2 feet in front of you is enough to make your heart skip, especially noticing it at the very last second. The environment within itself is a massive improvement from Night Fight, and fits the theme very well, with traps you'd expect in an ancient tomb lurking in every corner, combined with enemies and trapdoors that will crush Crash at a moment's notice. My only issue with this stage is the soundtrack. Although it does match the theme, I would have appreciated a more upbeat variant of Egyptian themed levels to match the rushing aspect of the level. With the 25th crystal retrieved, we finally reach the end of our journey and take on Cortex for the 3rd time. Jumping into the fight, Cortex approaches us in one last cutscene, which is one that is a bit creepy in hindsight.
I'm sorry. This is the part where I'm supposed to be angry, full of rage, incensed beyond belief. Once again, you have outsmarted and outspun my best henchman. I should be rather upset, shouldn't I?
And in fact, we're furious! But it seems you have overlooked one small detail, you little orange delivery boy! Now that you have gathered all the crystals, all we have to do is take them from you!
Cortex telling us he isn't afraid or anxious can either deliver the idea that he's completely lost his mind, or has such a huge ego that he feels he can't possibly lose this time around. But I choose to believe it's the latter. The fight with Cortex is amazing, and just paints Crash 2's Cortex fight in a much worse light, when Crash Warped was developed in 10 months whereas Crash 2 had 11. The arena features Aku Aku and Uka Uka engaging in a fierce beam clash reminiscent of Dragon Ball, forcing us to dodge not only our enemies but also our allies, as the beam will instantly kill Crash if it's touched. While we're jumping around the room, Cortex will shoot us with the orbs from the first game from his weapon, and also throw mines around to catch us off guard if we're not paying attention. Once he's done throwing mines, his force field will disappear, giving us an open opportunity to stun him if we're fast enough. In order to deal damage, the player must keep spinning to throw Cortex into the hole that opens up in the center of the stage, which adds a bit of depth to the fight as a whole. The next phase is more or less the same, except instead of a beam clash, the mask will choose to slam into each other and spin around the room, which can cause some panic. Repeating this 4 times in a row will defeat Cortex, sending him below the Time Twister and granting the final ability, which is the Running Shoes. This then leads into a cutscene of Uka Uka and Cortex saying that the fight is not over, prompting us to return to all the previous levels to collect the clear gems and the newly introduced time relics, once again locking the true ending behind 100% completion. Overall, I would argue that Crash Warped is probably the best in the original trilogy. It does have its flaws, and seems to suffer the most from recycled level theming. But at some points, those recycled levels try their best to offer a new gimmick that justifies the return to it, which is much more than I can say with previous games in the series. My only problem with this game is the idea of abilities. I feel like having new moves locked behind progression is a step backward, when you consider that Crash 2 gave us new abilities from the start. And if given the opportunity for a little more polish, then there could have been power-ups that could have justified beating a boss much more. I think a way to remedy this would have been to give us abilities that directly correlate with that boss, which the engine fight did to an extent by giving us a bazooka that clearly matched the theme of the battle. Although it has its fair share of problems that I don't really agree with, there is a clear reason why Crash Warped is the highest rated in the entire series, and beloved by millions across the entire world. For its time, there is no argument that this is the best Crash developed by Naughty Dog, and despite its clear time crunches, they tried incredibly hard to make sure their products were up to a standard that was expected. The ending of Crash Warped takes us into Crash Team Racing, which is going to be very hard for me to say some nice things about, because I did not enjoy that game whatsoever. If you reached this far into the video, once again, thank you very much. And if you want to see more, consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a like. They help me reach new people who may enjoy my content just like you do. Thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you all next time.